The reel-to-reel audio spun in the dim evidence room, the faint hiss of aged magnetic tape filling the air as investigators leaned closer. A trembling female voice, nearly consumed by static, whispered a location, a date, and a breath that halted before nomming her pursuer that night's final plea unanswered. If you like stories like this, make sure to subscribe and like the video. Jacksonville in December of 1978 carried the particular stillness that lingered only when humidity fell and river winds cut sharply through the pine corridors of the North Florida coast. While the rest of the country braced for snowstorms and white lights across suburban porches, Duval County prepared for its own holiday shift, and the seasonal population of naval families, snowbirds, and traveling students created a temporary anonymity that would later complicate every list of witnesses, service receipts, and hotel registrations. For a young woman arriving alone, the city offered both sun-drenched optimism and unlit alleyways that vanished into the riverbank industrial lots. The victim would later be identified as 22-year-old college senior, not native to Florida, but temporarily staying in Jacksonville for her winter break employment program, a clerical position offered through a traveling staffing agency. She arrived on December 14 and was assigned a room at a budget motel near Phillips Highway, a corridor known to bridge the distance between legitimate commerce and quiet transient drift. Seasonal travel meant full rooms, rotating keys, and a front desk accustomed to temporary names, and her check-in record reflected that pattern: neat handwriting, payment receipts, and no particular sign of distress. Her disappearance did not begin as a dramatic news flash. When she missed a scheduled holiday phone call to her parents, the assumption leaned toward busy seasonal work or festive distraction. But by the time Christmas lights glowed against the St. Johns River and New Year's advertisements filled store windows, her suitcase, motel room, and paycheck remained untouched. It took the staffing agency's missed payroll pickup and unanswered calls to finally raise concern, leading to a formal missing person report filed after the holiday rush. The first police efforts were procedural: motel staff interviews, clerical logs from her office assignment, bus schedules, and bank withdrawal slips. The December chill sharpened when investigators realized her December 20 paycheck envelope remained uncollected, and her Christmas morning motel room showed no sign of packing or preparation. Her coat remained draped on the back of the room chair. The disposable Kodak camera she brought for holiday photographs was still wrapped in its intact plastic sleeve. The mundane detail held more weight than any alarm. No young woman leaving voluntarily for a holiday adventure ignored her paycheck, her winter clothing, and her planned calls home. Jacksonville's media, shaped by its blend of naval presence and Southern formality, reported the case only in brief columns. Holiday accidents, New Year's events, and the city's raucous football season overshadowed a single missing adult. Witnesses from the motel remembered her face only in fragments. Some recalled a shy smile, others a polite nod in the breakfast lobby. The clerk remembered her asking about bus lines toward Riverside, the historic district she planned to explore before Christmas Eve. No one remembered seeing her after December 19. Her file grew stagnant beside hundreds of holiday transients who vanished into other states. When New Year's confetti swept into gutters along Bay Street, her photograph remained taped to the bulletin board behind the precinct desk, curling at the edges. The winter season turned, tourists cleared out, and Jacksonville returned to its ordinary rhythm of port traffic and courthouse routines. The case might have faded entirely if not for a burglary arrest 2 months later. A local drifter was taken into custody, and in his stolen duffel investigators located items that did not belong to any known victims. a motel key stamped with the same Phillips Highway lodging code assigned to the missing woman, a holiday brochure from Riverside, and a tiny square of motel stationery bearing a partial phone number scribbled in her handwriting. While the possession raised suspicion, no physical evidence linked him to violence or disappearance, and the items were dismissed as scavenged. The pivotal break occurred not from physical recovery, but from technology aging into new investigative tools. In 1992, when Florida departments transitioned into digital archival systems, the old audio logs of 911 lines were transferred from magnetic tape to compact formats. During this conversion process, a technician flagged a December 20, 1978 recording that had never been cataloged properly due to its static distortion. The voice was faint but articulate enough to record a location near the river docks, a street number, and a reference to being followed after leaving the Riverside bus line. The call ended abruptly, not with a scream or visible violence, but with silence and tape hiss. The address mentioned in that audio led back to a warehouse complex owned by a seasonal shipping contractor. In 1978, the complex was one of many seasonal freight depots used for imported holiday merchandise and naval surplus. Records showed only temporary staff, delivery drivers, and contract guards assigned to the building. Most names had scattered across states by the 1990s, yet one guard's employment file drew attention. His shift logs overlapped exactly with the missing woman's final verified bus route and date. His personnel notes included notations of prior misconduct, late arrivals, and eventually termination in early January 1979. In reopened interviews, the former supervisor described the guard as a quiet seasonal hire, neither aggressive nor memorable, yet frequently requesting extra overtime on night routes. His address history placed him only minutes from the motel. Jacksonville's winter landscape offered little forensic hope after years of development, but warehouse renovation records revealed one more overlooked detail. During 1983 construction, a storage alcove had been sealed without inspection due to budget constraints. In 1993, when investigators returned with updated warrants, that alcove was unsealed. Within, evidence was recovered. Personal items matching the missing woman's belongings confirmed through family statements and purchase receipts. No physical remains were present, but the possession trail aligned with the timeline, her last movements, and the 911 call location. DNA science, still advancing, could not resolve every trace due to age and contamination, yet one remaining item provided clarity: a holiday bus transfer slip with her fingerprint preserved under layers of dust. On its reverse, in smeared ink, an employee security code was written, the same code issued to the warehouse guard during his seasonal contract. The police tracked him to a retirement trailer community in rural Georgia by the late 1990s. Questioning remained formal and carefully documented. Without confession, the case relied on circumstantial but converging proof. The warehouse access logs, possession trail, transferred property, and the preserved audio that placed her directly en route to his work location, while expressing fear of someone behind her. Eventually, grand jury review concluded there was sufficient correlation for charges. He was extradited to Florida, stood trial in Duval County, and after careful legal review, was convicted on charges related to unlawful confinement, resulting death by negligence, and evidence concealment consistent with 1978 statute applicability. The verdict arrived in winter, nearly 2 decades after her final call. Jacksonville's courthouse windows reflected strings of white December lights once again. Reporters noted the solemn tone, the absence of sensational headlines, and the respect granted to the family who traveled from out of state only to face the quiet closure of a life interrupted. The city moved into another holiday season, river winds carrying the same cold stillness of 1978. The motel she once stayed in had been replaced by a franchise chain, the warehouse district modernized, the reel-to-reel recordings retired to digital vaults. Yet the faint voice preserved on that aging tape remained a permanent reminder of a winter evening when a young woman tried to name her fear before silence overtook the line. Jacksonville's winter seasons tended to erase themselves under humid breezes and rotating populations, but the case never fully departed from local memory. The original investigators had retired, some passing away, others leaving the force before the Cold Case Bureau was formally structured. The 1978 disappearance had lacked the markers that usually compelled national attention. There were no dramatic police chases, no public ransom notes, and no holiday spectacle turning city squares into candlelight vigils. Instead, it was a quiet absence, the kind that occurred when a young traveler vanished in the middle of a city whose December population already blurred with seasonal drifters and military departures. The case's file sat untouched for years not because of negligence, but because no visible starting point had existed beyond her abandoned motel room and uncollected paycheck. The 1993 unsealing of the storage alcove marked the first tangible shift in investigative certainty. The cold dust, undisturbed for more than a decade, layered every personal item in a museum-like stillness. Each object was cataloged in silence. The holiday brochure she once carried, advertising Riverside's light displays and festive boat tour, was preserved with its December dates intact. The small hair clip, later confirmed by family photographs, rested exactly where it had been left, undisturbed since the winter when warehouse freight lines were busiest. No deteriorated biological evidence remained, and no dramatic forensic revelation occurred. Yet legal teams recognized that the possession trail itself formed a map across time, narrowing the list of individuals who could have accessed that sealed alcove in the precise season she disappeared. Investigators, archivists, and assisting state analysts reconstructed the timeline by tracing not emotion but routine. They examined his guard logs, his assigned entry points, and the holiday shipments he oversaw. They combed through warehouse traffic forms, radio logs, duty rosters, and even Christmas week lunch receipts. Every paper, faded and typed on brittle stock, was placed against the missing woman's bus route. She had stepped off the Riverside transit line around dusk, according to a surviving system ledger. She walked the path lined with Christmas window displays, past the live poinsettias staged outside storefronts, and turned toward the industrial corridor where lights dimmed and foot traffic vanished. The audio log captured only a fragment of her fear, but its timestamp aligned precisely with his recorded shift change. The grand jury hearing in the late 1990s marked both procedural closure and community reckoning. Jacksonville's courthouse, decorated modestly for the holiday term with evergreen wreaths and a single white-lit tree, hosted reporters who approached with professionalism. Coverage focused not on dramatization, but on the long work of archivists, evidence technicians, and retired officers who revisited every note made in 1978. The appeals process moved slowly through winter calendars until legal challenges diminished. His age, medical condition, and decades spent unnoticed in a quiet Georgia trailer park added a somber atmosphere to the proceedings rather than outrage. Prosecutors shaped their arguments through timelines, seasonal employment records, and an uninterrupted chain of circumstantial documentation. Closure did not arrive with a single revelation but through accumulation. The motel key, logged originally during the burglary arrest, was re-examined with enhanced imaging. The worn numbers on the tag matched precise seasonal issuance codes. Ledger books confirmed that key replacements were rare and strictly recorded during that era, meaning someone had either taken it directly from her possession or intercepted it in the narrow window between her last sighting and the end of his assigned shift. The construction firm, when contacted during review, verified that the sealed alcove was not accessible following January 1979. That confined the evidence placement to days before year's end, the same days when she disappeared, and when his overtime submissions increased. The timeline reconstruction stretched through moving holiday dates: her arrival near mid-December, her paycheck due on the 20th, her holiday sightseeing plans set for days leading to Christmas Eve. Every element confirmed her intention to remain within the city through Christmas and return home before the new year. Her absence was not spontaneous, not carefree, not voluntary. She was a planner, a list keeper, as attested by her calendar notes and the receipted bus passes she had methodically stored. The sealed alcove held not signs of fear, but signs of interruption, unfinished plans, a young person's December itinerary halted in motion. Jacksonville's Cold Case Division gained renewed respect during the late 1990s and early 2000s as more historical cases reopened under similar evidence transitions. The city archive system modernized its tape vaults, capturing thousands of previously overlooked audio files, handwritten notes, and witness lists. The 911 recording from her disappearance became a teaching example not of failure, but of how analog limitations once constrained urgent information. Her voice, nearly erased by tape degradation, was treated not as morbid artifact, but as testimony that transcended the decades separating her final call and the trial. Her parents, elderly by the time the conviction was finalized, requested a private acknowledgement rather than public memorial. They visited Jacksonville only once following the verdict, choosing a mild December afternoon. They walked the waterfront district that had been revitalized since 1978, pausing at the river's edge where winter sunlight scattered across the St. John's. They declined press interviews and left before evening lights illuminated downtown. Their departure reflected not joy, but exhaustion softened by resolution. The motel where she had stayed had long been demolished. In its place stood a standardized chain with renovated rooms, central air, and a holiday lobby decorated with artificial poinsettias. Few current employees knew the history of the land beneath their breakfast counter. Similarly, the warehouse district had been transformed by port modernization, logistic advancements, and governmental expansion. The alcove was now a corridor lined with climate-controlled storage bays. New workers carried badge scanners and underwent digital background checks rather than seasonal paper sign-ins. The retired guard's life history, pieced together only after charges were brought, reflected the quiet anonymity that often characterized cases of this nature. A man neither notorious nor communal, he had drifted through seasonal work, never forming ties, never gaining scrutiny. No record of prior violent offenses existed, yet employment logs and access privileges placed him at every juncture of her timeline. In the courtroom, he sat expressionless, offering neither apology nor protest. Witnesses described him as forgettable, a figure who had passed through Jacksonville unnoticed, except during the narrow window of December 1978. His sentencing reflected the legal boundaries of a case tried decades after disappearance. Statutory language of the era determined final charges. He was placed in a state correctional medical unit due to declining health, where he lived only a few years post-conviction, passing without fanfare during an early winter morning. His death prompted no renewed headlines, only a clerical note filed in state corrections records. For Jacksonville, the case served as a reminder of transitional decades, when industrial docks met emerging tourism, when December seasons brought both celebration and transience. The river, a constant in the city's identity, continued its silent flow past churches hosting Christmas choirs, restaurants offering New Year's specials, and neighborhoods decorated in gold and white holiday lighting. The young woman's absence threaded itself into the city's historical memory, not as spectacle but as documentation. A file tab, a recovered tape, a sealed space reopened. In cold case units across Florida, her timeline is still referenced during training sessions on archival audio, seasonal employment risk assessments, and the importance of reconstructing minor holiday records that might otherwise seem irrelevant. Her 1978 December itinerary, once dismissed as a brief seasonal visit, now stands as a comprehensive investigative map. Arrival, checkout pattern, sightseeing notes, pay envelope, bus line stamp, final call. The aftermath did not reshape Jacksonville's identity, nor did it alter national law, but it provided a measured closure for a family who waded through winters and holidays, watching seasons change without answer. The final investigative summary, preserved in digital and paper form, is concise. It lists her name, age, seasonal employment classification, disappearance date, recovered items, audio confirmation, suspect access, and legal conclusion. The last line notes that, while physical remains were never recovered, the chain of evidence was sufficient to determine her fate, legally and procedurally. As December returned year after year, the courthouse continued its routine docket. Christmas wreaths were hung each season exactly as they had been in 1978, 1993, 1998, and every winter after. Outside, the river air cooled by evening, carrying the same silent undertone that once accompanied a young woman on her final walk from Riverside to the industrial corridor. Under those winter lights, Jacksonville's history accepted its resolution quietly, without parade, without spectacle, only with the enduring echo of her voice preserved on a tape that finally reached the ears meant to hear it. The years following the conclusion of the trial entered Jacksonville's collective memory with an understated sobriety. Christmas wreaths continued to hang along Bay Street, and the downtown marina's lights reflected across the black winter surface of the St. Johns River. But for those within the cold case division, December would never again pass without recollection of her final walk. The 1978 disappearance had once been a mere holiday season mystery, a vanishing absorbed by the rush of visiting servicemen, seasonal clerks, and tourists escaping northern snow. Now it existed as a forensic benchmark, a reminder that transient months and rotating populations could not excuse investigative dormancy. Each detail, once overlooked due to holiday congestion, had proven to be part of a quiet chain that connected her last known moments to the eventual sealed alcove discovery, and finally to conviction. After the guard's death, the state filed routine closure documentation. There were no vigils, no televised retrospectives, only an archival note acknowledging that the responsible party no longer existed to contest the evidence compiled against him. Reporters released brief updates, mostly single-column pieces in December editions, noting that the cold case, which had stretched from Carter-era Jacksonville to early 21st century Florida, had ended with the quiet passing of an aging man in a state-run facility. The commentary remained restrained, praising investigators for persistence rather than dramatizing the process. The outcome was accepted not as triumph, but as fulfillment of procedure delayed by time and changing technology. The digital conversion of archived materials became the lingering legacy of the investigation. The old reel-to-reel, with its faded foam padding and metal spools, was stored permanently in climate-controlled evidence shelving, now irrelevant as an executable device, but invaluable as artifact. Training modules for new investigators reference the disappearance annually, particularly in December sessions when rookies learned how holiday transients, seasonal employment, and high traveler volume created investigative environments where ephemeral data, such as bus receipts, room ledgers, or temporary payroll envelopes, could serve as anchor points decades later. Her pay envelope, untouched and quietly waiting in a motel drawer that no one had opened until after New Year's, became a case study in recognizing absence as evidence. Family impact did not escalate into national advocacy movements or legislative campaigns. Her parents aged quietly, their grief subdued and measured. After closure, their primary request involved a sealed graveside marker positioned in their hometown, though no remains were interred beneath it. Each holiday season, the florist confirmed delivery of a simple evergreen arrangement tied with a white ribbon, exactly as they had requested annually before the case resolved. No press contacted them afterward, respecting boundaries and the private conclusion they had chosen after decades of waiting. Jacksonville's changing geography further erased the physical traces of the case. The River District transformed into a structured municipal zone with expanded port surveillance, upgraded lighting, and renovated pedestrian access. The warehouse block, where she had unknowingly stepped into the most vulnerable point of her path, was restructured with modern freight monitoring and security digitization. Seasonal guards were replaced by fully vetted contract officers logged through biometric access scanners. The guard logbooks of 1978, handwritten and barely legible in portions, stood in stark contrast to the barcoded entry badges used in contemporary operations. No similar disappearance occurred in subsequent Decembers, and procedural reforms were attributed indirectly to the memory of situations like hers. Quiet, unsolved cases that, once overlooked, taught agencies the risks embedded in moments of darkness between festive storefronts and industrial corridors. Cold case teams nationwide took note of Jacksonville's methodical closure. The key lesson was not discovery of dramatic confession or improbable forensics, but steady re-examination of minor archived elements. A mislabeled tape in a basement reel box, a construction permit that documented a sealed alcove, a misplaced motel key tied to a drifter arrested months later. The case became a demonstration that time itself could serve as an investigative tool, revealing patterns that were invisible when witnesses were dispersed, and population flow rapidly shifted during holiday periods. Researchers studying late 1970's mobility trends cited her disappearance as a representation of increased travel independence among young adults, especially women taking seasonal work assignments across state lines. Jacksonville's status as a winter port city amplified that mobility, exposing her to a landscape in transition between festive tourism and industrial freight expansion. Her documentation reflected a person not searching for danger, but exploring a historic district during a holiday-lit evening. She had planned her route with precision, referencing brochures and mapping her sightseeing explicitly. The 911 tape captured the moment when planned holiday exploration intersected fatally with unlit logistics zones and solitary return routes. Her absence remained a faint but persistent thread in municipal narrative. Dinner tables, particularly among retired officers, referenced her case as a moment when procedural perseverance overcame decades of stillness. New Year gatherings among former detectives included annual reflections not of trauma, but of endurance. How a young woman's final attempt to reach help through an unstable analog transmission would eventually be honored by digital clarity, expanded archival access, and the quiet work of technicians who understood the weight of forgotten recordings. The psychological dimension of the case remained subdued and professionally managed. No expert panels dissected her final moments for entertainment. No speculative documentaries emerged. Instead, Jacksonville's Historical Society included a modest write-up in its winter bulletin titled Seasonal Displacement and Investigative Delay, a 1978 case revisited. It focused on travel patterns, employment documentation, and city planning rather than emotion. Her identity remained intact, defined by her choices and her path, not absorbed into broader sensational narratives. Over the decades, the seasonal hearing model for freight security underwent structural revisions. Access logs became digitized, temporary workers faced updated background checks, and sealed storage spaces received mandatory inspections prior to and after renovation. The alcove that once stored her belongings without disruption now existed only in blueprints and archived construction photos. What had lingered unseen for more than 10 years became a symbol of how overlooked architectural corners could contain answers when more visible investigative avenues offered none. The community's memory found expression not in ceremony but in routine acknowledgement. Each December, a small wreath appeared on the precinct bulletin board where her photo had once yellowed before joining the cold case archive. No name accompanied the wreath, no public commentary explained it. Officers understood its presence, and when asked by newer recruits, responded with brief summaries of how a misfiled tape, a sealed room, and a set of seasonal logs had converged across decades. When researchers later examined the frequency of disappearances during holiday travel periods in port cities, Jacksonville's 1978 case served as a rare example in which resolution arrived long after all contemporaneous witnesses had departed the city. Her disappearance was not marked by dramatic last sightings or targeted pursuit. Instead, she vanished into the intersection of festive movement and industrial anonymity. The city had expanded, then contracted around her absence, unaware that the final clue was preserved in magnetic deterioration on a tape that had remained unheard, until conversion experts brought forward the faint, trembling voice asking for help near the River District on December 20. The solved status of the case provided no comfort equal to restoration, yet it upheld the professional obligation to not allow silence to remain permanent. Jacksonville's archives, once a maze of filing cabinets and real containers, shifted to climate-controlled digital repositories where her call would never again sit unlisted. The evolution of the case marked a turning point in how city agencies understood the holiday season, not only as celebration, travel, and waterfront lights, but as a period requiring increased vigilance amid shifting populations and quiet transients. Her timeline stands today in forensic training modules as a clean evidentiary line. Arrival, known path, unreturned paycheck, recorded distress, sealed storage, recovered possessions, linked employment access, conviction, and closure. Each December, as Jacksonville prepares its riverfront for New Year countdowns and boat parades, the case remains a solemn undercurrent beneath the illuminated skyline. Not a headline, not a reenactment, but an archival truth carried forward in records that will outlast every seasonal decoration and every winter tourist who passes unknowingly through the same streets she once walked. Jacksonville entered the early 2000s with improved systems, winter patrol adjustments, and a refined understanding of how fleeting December strangers could redefine investigative timelines. The city had moved forward, paved and modernized, yet retained a quiet respect for what had been learned from a case that began not with a headline but with a missing paycheck and a holiday room left waiting. Her name circulated only when necessary in professional circles. She did not become a cautionary folklore or a rallying emblem of urban peril. Instead, she remained a factual record, an evidentiary sequence, a winter traveler whose disappearance provided instruction without spectacle. Over the years, the archived 911 log became part of the state's digital forensic reference bank. Technicians used it to demonstrate signal decay, call routing issues, and the fragility of emergency communication infrastructure in the late 1970s. The call, though incomplete, served as an enduring artifact of a moment when help nearly reached her. Its tone, muted, static distorted, yet unmistakably urgent, was played not for dramatization but for training. Officers and dispatch trainees listened with the understanding that lost seconds and misrouted signals carried consequences spanning decades. It was not the content of the call that changed protocol, but the recognition that holiday staffing shortages, technical constraints, and archived oversight could shape the fate of a case long after the recording had ceased. The cold case analysts who inherited her file in the 1990s retired in turn, passing the case summary along through structured transition memos. Each successor inherited not an active mystery but a completed timeline, a caution that holiday absences must never again be assumed voluntary without corroborating evidence. The city's end-of-year personnel briefings now included reminders that young adults traveling through unfamiliar port districts functioned within a complicated web of freight schedules, bus lines, night routes, and low-visibility corridors. Public memory of her story existed most tangibly in policy revision notes. Warehouse districts near the river implemented better-lit pedestrian routes and required contracted security staff to log exterior sweeps more frequently during December shifts. Those precautions were not publicly tied to her case, nor were signs erected in her honor. Instead, the city absorbed the lessons quietly. When port expansions proceeded in the early 2010s, internal planning committees referenced historical security data, including notes drawn from the 1978 disappearance. The sealed alcove, once dismissed as construction oversight, transformed into a case study for mandatory clearance inspections whenever industrial zones underwent renovation. Her family continued to observe their chosen ritual each December. The evergreen tribute sent to her symbolic graveside remained unchanged. No ornaments, no holiday ribbons beyond a plain white band, no public reading or broadcast mention. They declined all interview requests. Reporters, recognizing the dignity of that silence, ceased inquiries after the first anniversary of the conviction. Local newspapers shifted coverage focus from her case to broader winter safety reminders, positioning her as an unspoken template rather than a direct reference. She existed in civic consciousness not by name, but by influence on training manuals, safety briefings, and archival reforms. When Jacksonville's Maritime Museum hosted a temporary exhibition on winter port evolution, a display board outlined the transformation of emergency response systems from analog tape to encrypted digital routing. The exhibit did not feature her image or refer to her by name, but the transition it highlighted, the modernization driven by necessity rather than tragedy, reflected her lingering presence in city infrastructure. Emergency technicians, when asked by visitors about the significance of certain dated radios and dispatcher panels, explained that older systems contained gaps that modern safeguards had successfully eliminated. Meanwhile, her former motel site remained commercially unremarkable. The hotel chain operating there maintained its holiday decoration schedule, placing red and gold displays in the lobby each December. Travelers unaware of the land's history passed through its revolving doors, checking in with mobile apps rather than carbon copy signature slips. The chain's digital cleanliness, ambient holiday music, and consistent lighting contrasted sharply with the dim corridors and transient anonymity of the original building. Front desk staff, compliant with corporate training, monitored uncollected pay envelopes and missed checkouts with procedural attentiveness that had not existed in 1978. Her case also provided a seldom discussed but academically recognized example of how generational investigative patience could intersect with evolving technology. Forensic scholars cited the timeline as evidence that unsolved disappearances were not defined solely by the moment of loss, but by the lifespan of archived artifacts. The sealed alcove, the motel key, the bus slip, and the misfiled audio demonstrated that temporal distance could clarify more effectively than immediate response in environments defined by holiday volume and transient circulation. Even after the guard's passing, procedural follow-ups continued for years. Review panels, legislative adjustments to archival protocols, and quiet acknowledgement that winter seasons demanded unique investigative discipline. Jacksonville's December atmosphere retained its blend of festive illumination and river winds, yet those responsible for safety operations understood that celebratory months carried their own investigative burdens. Night routes near industrial districts no longer remained unpatrolled between shifts. Dispatch centers increased staff capacity during peak seasonal travel. Holiday travelers received printed safety guidance at bus terminals and waterfront venues, discreet and informational, advising recommended routes and transit schedules. The case remained within Florida's cold case curriculum as an example not of dramatic pursuit, but of procedural evolution. Its influence did not stem from fear but from structure, meticulous record-keeping, survival of forgotten evidence, and the eventual unlocking of a storage space sealed during a winter when no one thought to search its brittle drywall boundaries. In training seminars, instructors explained that her disappearance represented the convergence of three December elements: dense travel anonymity, seasonal employment turnover, and analog recording fragility. None of these factors alone predicted investigative delay, but together, they formed a barrier overcome only through time, archival care, and digital conversion. Jacksonville continued its winter customs with a muted nod to what had changed. Boat parades on the river resumed annually, light displays reflected across the docks, and the courthouse wreath hung with the same understated precision year after year. Beneath routine celebration, an unspoken understanding persisted. Not every December absence could be attributed to holiday distraction or voluntary departure. Each unreturned call, uncollected paycheck, and silent room now carried procedural weight. The final archived summary, stored permanently in climate-controlled preservation, included only the essential facts: her age, arrival date, employment assignment, last verified movement, audio timestamp, discovery of personal belongings, access linkage, conviction, and legal closure. The official language remained measured, its tone consistent with documentary restraint. No line exaggerated, no phrasing shifted toward narrative flourish. She was preserved in record exactly as she had been in life: precise, scheduled, conscientious, and moving through a city she intended to explore briefly before returning home for the new year. As holiday seasons continued, Jacksonville aged and rebuilt, its skyline brightening with each passing December. Travelers walked the same waterfront she once photographed, unaware of the winter path that never completed its return. Yet the archival systems, dispatch structures, and port safety protocols she indirectly shaped continued operating in quiet vigilance. The case that began with a missing clerk in a busy December city ended not in spectacle but in structurally reinforced memory, an outcome defined not by sorrow alone, but by sustained professionalism across decades.